It's 5 o'clock, so if you would, come in and have a seat. We're going to begin with our devotional time together before we send the kids off to their classes for tonight and then turn the rest of the hour over to Brother Arvie. For our invitation tonight, we're going to be in the book of Amos. If you want to go ahead and pick up your Bible and start thinking about finding the book of Amos, we'll take a thought from there in just a moment. I'm glad that you're here tonight. Look forward to this opportunity. Of course, we will not be here next Sunday night, but then the 31st we will have a service, and I believe Brother Arvie will bring his final lesson in 2 weeks from tonight. So be aware of that and be thinking about it. As we begin to get started tonight, let's take a moment and think about this hour and what it can mean for us as we gather together. And let's go to God in thanksgiving for it. Would you bow with me? Dear Heavenly Father, it is a blessing for us to be here together tonight, and I thank you for each person and for each family that's here. And this congregation that has so many people that are willing to go above and beyond the call of duty and the work and the love and the time and effort that's put in to help strengthen this body, to help encourage its members. I appreciate so much the talent and the drive and the passion that you have blessed these people with. And as we strive to encourage each other and to stir one another on to love and good deeds, I pray that you would bless us in those efforts. Bless us together in these times. Help tonight for things to be said that we can take that will help us in our everyday lives and will help us draw closer to you. And then bless us throughout the coming days as families and as workers, employees, employers, and strangers and neighbors, that we would do all that we can do to be the kind of people you want us to be. Help us to be that city set on a hill so that we can shine like stars in the night sky. Forgive us when we fall and give us the strength to stand and try again. And we offer this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. John?
If you wouldn't mind, put a marker on number 844. "844, guide me, O thou great Jehovah." Make sure that's correct. There are two versions of that song. I do this often. Excuse me, time out, 30 seconds. 390, please mark 390, not 844. 390 is the version I want. "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah." 390, pardon me for that. And then we'll sing, "The Lord will find a way for me. I know the Lord will find a way for me," before Adam extends the invitation and has a word for us. That's number 523. I moved my marker when I was looking for the other. 523. We'll sing all three verses as we begin with this song. If you would like, let us stand and sing together, please.
Lord has said
I thought about this morning, and I meant to say something then, and I got caught up in telling the story. But maybe the funniest part about having these rocks on stage this morning was looking at Brent May's face as he came up here on his way up, and it was like just the look on his face of, I don't think these belong here, but I can't do anything about it. So, walking around them. There's a comedian named Mike Birbiglia, and he's a great storyteller. And he can just take the most simple, mundane things, and the way that he talks about them and the perspective that he puts on it, it's just really funny. And he was talking about, he was kind of comparing couches and beds. And he talked about things I never really thought about, but it made me think about Amos and a passage that shows up in one of these chapters that Amos makes. And he's talking about couches and beds and the pros and the cons, and he says, beds are really comfortable, but they know it. And they kind of develop a complex about it. Beds are like, call me king. He's like, I need a box spring. Why do you need a box spring? I don't touch the ground. That's how beds are. Beds are like, I think I want this entire room to be named after me. Right? And he says that's how beds are. But he says a couch is like a bed, but it hugs you. It reaches out and it hugs you, and how comfortable the couch is, and how you can go to your couch and you can just lay on it, and you can live life from your couch. And as he's describing this, this relationship that he has with his furniture in his home, it got me thinking about the language that Amos uses in chapter 6. As he's trying to get through, Amos is just an old country boy who is from Tekoa. He's from the southern region, and God sends him up into the big cities of the northern kingdom. And they are having a really good time. They are enjoying prosperity. The northern kingdom at this particular point feels like everything is going its way, and they don't have anything to worry about, and everything's great. And Amos is trying to get through to them, you are rotting from the inside out. And finally he paints this picture for them in Amos chapter 6. Woe to those who are at ease in Zion, and those who feel secure on the mountain of Samaria, the notable men of the first of the nations to whom the house of Israel comes. Pass over to Calneh and see, and go from there down to Hamath the Great. Go down to Gath of the Philistines. Are you better than these kingdoms, or is their territory greater than your territory? O you who put far away the day of disaster and bring near the seat of violence. Woe to those who lie on beds of ivory and stretch themselves out on their couches, who eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, singing idle songs to the sound of the harp, and like David invent for themselves instruments of music. He's not saying that leisure time in and of itself is bad, but he's saying that you have lost sight of your humility. You have lost sight of what it means to stand in fear of the Lord Almighty. And the day of destruction has been announced, and you're just laying on your comfy couch. You're just enjoying leisure time. You're pretending like everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about, when the signs are around you, when the Lord has spoken and you are choosing not to hear because it is easier, because it is simpler. I think that's a real challenge for us today, because we enjoy such immense prosperity. We enjoy the bounty of being able to sit back in our homes and watch a football game on TV, or to take an afternoon and go off into the woods and enjoy some quiet time, or these other things that in and of themselves are absolutely wonderful things. There's nothing wrong with them. But if they become the standard by which we live our lives, eventually when the trumpet sounds, when the warning comes, we are far too comfortable to be bothered. And that seems to be the picture that Amos is painting here, and we have to be vigilant. We have to stay on guard. Jesus made the same kinds of comments to the disciples when He's teaching them. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch, keep watch, be on guard. I hope that you're doing that. I hope that you're paying attention to the things that are going on and not just getting so comfortable and so at ease that if someone calls and says, we've got to act, well, you can't be bothered to do that because of how comfy our life of leisure has become. There's an old saying about preaching that preaching has two jobs. The job of preaching is oftentimes to comfort the afflicted, but then just as much it's the responsibility to afflict the comfortable. And we've got to be able to know where we fit in that category and when we need the right kind of words of encouragement to go in the right way. Tonight, if you need encouragement of any kind, we offer this invitation moment, this opportunity for you to let us know what your need is. And if you prefer to do that in a private way, then please come and talk to someone later about that. But if it's something right now that you'd like to bring before the congregation so that we can pray for you and encourage you, or anything else that you need, now's the opportunity to come as we stand together and sing.
Appreciate you being here this evening. This is going to be a record time for my announcements. So I think I'm going to be done in less than a minute. But if you did not have the opportunity to take the Lord's Supper this morning, it will be ready for you to the door to my right. If you want to exit at this time, one of our men will be there to serve you. Just wanted, I know the youth is going tonight, but they do have a get-together Tuesday night. They've got a Devo, so just keep that in mind for the younger ones. Also, next Sunday, our AM service will be the same on Christmas Eve, but we will not have a PM service, so just make note of that as well. Didn't have any changes to the sick list, not that I was aware of, but we did mention this morning that we want to put Monica on our prayer list, a friend of Larry's, so we want to remember her. We also want to remember the West family. Over the passing of Jerry West, we want to keep Keith and all the West family in our prayers at this time. I do believe that's all I have. Does anybody have any other announcements before we dismiss our classes? If not, we'll go ahead and be dismissed to our classes.
out, and you can we can get the highlights. So the first one we'll start with is Taoism or Taoism. Either name works. There is debate about which name actually is the official name. Taoism is the Western pronunciation, and that is allowed because they say that we Westerners cannot properly pronounce the name in Chinese as it should be, the original Taoism name. So you'll hear me probably use both of them as we go through this. Taoism is an unusual faith system, philosophy, ideology, as we'll see. And it begins with how many followers they have. The number is somewhere between 6 and 20 million worldwide. And that's because of some of the things you'll see here, the duality, the overlap with other groups that we've looked at. But depending on what source you look at, you'll get anywhere from 6 to 20 million. Sometimes you'll hear the number 8 million, so it's somewhere in between. Also, one of the most complex of the world religions. And there's a lot of controversy that surrounds its history, its nature, and its teaching. And again, as I said, even the term is debated. It's full of paradoxes. And most Taoists don't see that as an issue. They really will acknowledge that, yeah, it seems to contradict, but it doesn't really matter. It can be explained in terms of its history and its effect on the Chinese people. And it's why we really sometimes do not delineate it as a religion, but more like a ritual, ethnic rituals. The word itself comes from the word Dao, D-A-O, which just means path or way. So it is the path or way to follow of this guy, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is considered to be the founder of Taoism. We know less about this guy than any other founder of any other world religion. And even what little information we know about him, we don't really know how accurate it is. There's even some debate within Taoism. Some scholars say he didn't even really live, that he's just kind of somebody that was dreamed up. And so we just don't know. Some view him as a deity, some do not. For those who say that he lived, they say that he lived the 6th century before Christ. And that he was actually a contemporary of Confucius. There's even one Taoist legend that says the two of them met and talked about philosophy and ideology. Other people, as I said earlier, think that the legends about him really are not based in historical fact. That is not his original name. He had another name, but was born with another name. But Lao Tzu just means master, old master. So he was given that name as a title by his students. He is the author of this book. It's called, the English translation is The Way of Life, Lao Tzu. But you can see in the very bottom there, if you can see the bottom, it's the classic tradition. It's Dao Yong Ching is the book itself. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But the story of how this book came about is that he was a court archivist. He worked as a scribe for the government. And he became very disenchanted with government and with the way things were and morality. And he decides he's just going to leave. He's going to walk away from all of it. And the legend is that he gets to the border of China and he has to pass through a mountain pass to get out of China to go into another country. The guard there recognizes him and says, "I will not let you pass until you write down the sum of all your knowledge and wisdom." And so he sits down and he writes all of that, gives it to this guy. The guy lets him pass, and then that's it. He passes into obscurity. No one ever hears of him ever again. And so this book is the result of what he wrote. Now the book, the literal name is The Classic of the Way of Power and Virtue. It's really a small book. It's just over 5,000 words. So it's not a lot of words. It's divided into 81 chapters, so it's a lot of small chapters. And typically, if you see it in an English translation, you will see it kind of like poetry, like when you look at Psalms or most of the book of Job, how that's italicized and kind of indented. That's the typeset that you'll see for it. The thing about it is, there's been over 1,000 commentaries written about this book. So the book itself is pretty small, but over 1,000 commentaries have been written by Taoist scholars to talk about and expound on the teachings of Lao Tzu. And there's one other thing that's important for us. It's the second most translated book in history. It's been translated into more languages than any other except one book. And we know what that one book is, right? The Bible, God's Word, right? It's number 2. Most people do not believe that Lao Tzu wrote this. They believe that it was written beginning in the 4th century BC for a period of about 200 years. So you got multiple writers over a 200-year period. The theme of his teachings is that all human achievements are folly, especially elaborate government. Now, let's see who was paying attention and remembers what we talked about last week. Which one did we talk about last week that said something about government? It was connected to government. Say it a little louder, you got it? Confucian teaching, that's right. All right? So now Lao Tzu comes along with his philosophy and he says, all this human achievement is just folly, you're wasting your time, and especially all this emphasis on government. So that would mean that Taoism or Taoism is a contradiction to Confucian teaching, right? Except that it's not. It's not considered to be. In fact, part of the problem with numbering how many Taoists there are is the fact that some people are Taoists, and followers of Confucius. So they might seem to be opposite, but they're not. They really kind of coexist as a value system in Eastern Asian societies. So the early teachings were only vaguely theistic, but by 1st, 2nd century AD, they began to develop more about worship, more about gods, deities, temples, and sacrifices. So there are several principles that fit into this way or life of Tao. One is the transcendent unity of all things, and that higher consciousness can be achieved when you kind of let go of personal preferences. You try to stop focusing on self so much. If you've ever heard the term actionless action, that's Taoist in nature. And that's the idea that really there's a force, a path or a way, that's Tao. There's a force that's kind of driving the universe. And we are just tilting at windmills when we try to fight that force. And so what you want to do is just learn to go with the flow. Just kind of go with life as it is and accept the natural flow of things. And so once you do that, then you're beginning to reach this higher plane of ethics and the ultimate source of reality, which is the rhythmic nature of the universe. So they believe that there are two aspects that interplay in this ever-changing, ever-shifting cosmic force of reality. And most of us have heard of yin and yang, right? Okay? And you can see kind of the attributes there of the two. Yin is the dark, receptive female aspect. Yang is the bright, assertive male aspect. And so you have these two forces that are pulling against each other, and the goal is to align yourself to where you're not influenced by that, and you just kind of go with the force, the Tao. So the teachings then that center around this have to do with these four principal ideas. The basic unity behind the universe and is really a mysterious force called Tao. Some Taoists, they don't believe in a creator God, but some Taoists will call it the first cause. So it's first cause versus a God in the traditional sense. And they say that it's useless to fight against this force. When we try to achieve things and when we try to set our own agendas, we're fighting against this. You got to just blend in and go with it. The second thing that they believe is that life itself is the greatest possession. The life that we're in, the life that we're living, is the highest attainable, greatest possession that we have. And so because of that, they say that life should be lived simply, and they put a lot of focus on trying to extend their lives. And this is where you get into, and we don't have time to talk about it in depth, but in Taoism you have magic spells, and you have potions, and you have all of these things that kind of go over into what we might think of as witchcraft and magic and all of this. They believe in all of that as it aligns to your health, aligns with your health and trying to extend your life. Because if life is the greatest possession, then you want to live as long as you can. Now, to do that, again, you want to live a life that's simple. Innocence is the word that they use there, that we should live our lives with an innocence like a child. And then pomp and glory are to be despised. They say that when we individually or collectively try to go after pomp and glory, that's when society goes off the tracks. They do have a kind of a second famous writing, and the second most famous work is by Zhuangzi. This was written about 200 years after Lao Tzu. He talked about, he kind of expounded on this and wrote some important things that they put into practice as the essential writings today. So initially, it was just kind of a philosophy, and then after the time of Christ, 1st century, 2nd century, it begins to evolve into more of a religious aspect. With the rise of the Communist Party in China, Communist Party started in 1920, rose to power in 1947. They weren't really sure about this because they were okay if it was an ideology, but if it was a religion, they didn't want any part of it. And then there was that debate. But it's the dominant ideology in Chinese life and culture, and it was the preferred religion of Chinese leaders for centuries. A major feature of this is the veneration of ancestors. Now think back to very first class. Let's see if y'all can remember 7 weeks ago. What's the veneration of ancestors? What does it include?
Praying to them, asking them to look after you.
Yeah, it's honoring your ancestors because you believe that they have an impact on your current life, and you want to. It's akin to worship, but it's veneration. It's not quite worship. So that's a part of Taoism. Still very popular today. It really hasn't made as many inroads into the Western world as other Asian religions. But 80% of Taiwan today are Taoist, and about a third of China. And again today, especially in China, it's tied to magic potions, charms, spells, all of these to try to prolong your life. Little concern about life after death. Don't really believe in a God. All right, so that's Shinto. That is Taoism. All right, we go on to Shintoism. What country do you think of or would you associate with the Shinto faith? Japan, that's right, that's correct. And so it is really a form of Japanese nationalism, and as we'll talk towards the end of this, it created significant problems for them, especially when they start losing wars that their emperor has blessed. So Shinto faith embraces a wide variety of practices and beliefs. I know y'all get tired of me saying this sometimes, but in fact, it is so broad, it is so wide that sometimes it's hard to clearly define what is and isn't Shintoism. But it is centered in Japan. It's closely tied to nature and to the unseen world. And sometimes it's called the Japanese religion. It's had a huge, huge influence on the culture and society there. So it involves a worshipful attitude toward Japanese rivers, lakes, and mountains especially. Anybody in here ever been to Japan? Is it a beautiful country? Very beautiful. And so part of this is really the worship of the beauty of Japan. And their understanding is, as I'm about to walk you through, of how that beauty came to be and how the Japanese islands came to be. There is no founder. There is no official canon or creed or sacred literature. There is no explicit code of conduct or requirements, although we will talk about their temples. The word itself wasn't even coined until 6th century AD when the Buddhists began to come into Japan. And what that did was force the indigenous Japanese people to begin to kind of define and document their culture and their belief system. And so in doing that, they came up with this word. And this word is a derivative of the way of the gods. But most of the time, they translate the word kami. Kami, which means the way of the gods. So the Japanese belief system is that in the ancient times, the gods lived in Japan. And that the gods blessed Japan, and all the beauty that Japan has came about because the gods lived there and blessed them with all of the rivers and the mountains and all the things that they have. So one of the things also that helped kind of define this as the state religion was when Buddhism was coming in, 6th century. There's a legend. You know this thing about legends. It may or may not be true, right? So there's a legend that in 522 AD, Buddhist priests came to visit the emperor of Japan, and that they presented him with a Buddhist statue and with some Buddhist writings on a scroll. And he was so honored and he was so excited that they would give this to him. But his advisors told him, "You're going to anger our gods. You know, the gods, they live here. They're from here. And you're going to anger our gods." Now, think about, in the Old Testament, was there a time when Israel had conflict with somebody and somebody said, "Well, your God is the God of the mountains, but our God is the God of the valleys"? Do you remember that? It's in 1 Kings, right? Okay. So that's the same thought system here. Japan says, our gods here in Japan, that those advisors told the king, the emperor, they're not going to like the fact that you have taken these relics from these people who come from India. And the legend is that shortly after that, a plague broke out. So the advisors come back to the emperor and they say, "You see?" And he says, "So what do I do?" So they took the statue, they threw it in the river, they burned the Buddhist text that was given to the emperor, and the plague ceased. And so that kind of solidified Shintoism as the state religion for Japan. And they really, from there, began to think of themselves more and more as isolated. And so it was during the development of isolation, years and years and centuries of this, that the samurai began to come about. Now, who's seen the movie The Last Samurai? Okay, that's based in fact. And that's based in some of this, because you remember Admiral Perry, he goes in right before 1852, 1854, gunboat diplomacy. They want to get into Japan for trading. We do, America does, and other countries do. And so Japan, that had been isolated because of the Shinto faith, from the 500s up to the 1800s, for 1,300 plus years, they'd been isolated and closed down. They began to open up. And so that the movie The Last Samurai talks about the samurai who were part of holding up that old system. They were kind of losing their position, and the emperor was opening up. But so all this takes place in 1889, shortly after the time of the events from The Last Samurai. Japan rewrites their constitution. But when they rewrote their constitution, they rewrote it as Shintoism being the state religion. And in fact, in 1889, the government took over and began to fund 100,000 plus Shinto shrines. They began to pay the salaries of all the Shinto priests. And so 110,000 shrines, 16,000 priests. And then every shrine was dedicated to a local deity. So to back up just a little bit about the gods and their creation of Japan, anybody ever seen this painting here on the left? It's a popular painting. I've seen it years ago in somebody's house, and they had no idea what it was. And back then, I didn't know what it was. That is the Japanese painting of the two gods, Izanagi and Izanami, making the Japanese islands. They believed that they were gods up in the sky, and they took mud and put it on the end of the spear and let the mud drip off the end of the spear, and that's what created the Japanese islands. And they made them so beautiful that they decided to come and live there. And so that's their belief when it comes to the gods and how they made Japan. Now, there is another goddess that's very important to them, the sun goddess, Amaterasu, and they believed was the sun goddess. And they said that the first emperor of Japan was her grandson. Now, if an emperor is a descendant of a god, what does that make that emperor? A god. It makes him deity. So very early on, they believed that the emperorship, which is handed down through a family in Japan, they believe that they're deity. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So emperor worship began then, and the emperor was seen as a living god. Christianity came in with Roman Catholicism about 1549. There was in 1627, there was a kind of a peasant revolt that was, the Japanese officials attached it to the Catholic Church, and that was just an opportunity for them to throw out all Christians. And then we talked about Admiral Perry and the gunboat in The Last Samurai. All right, so the Shinto faith really is much about patriotism. A lot of movie references tonight. What's the movie with Tommy Lee Jones as MacArthur going in after Japan? What was that movie? It's not very old. I think The Emperor is the name of the movie, isn't it? Anybody seen that movie? No? It's not very old. Well, in that movie, there's a scene where MacArthur has gone in after World War II, and he's trying to figure out how to kind of promote their agenda and his plan. And somebody comes up with the bright idea that they'll get the emperor to go on the radio apologize for the war, say that he was wrong, and the Americans have come in, they've got a great new idea. And in the scene in the movie, there's people who are pushing back and saying, no, you can't do that. Now, why could they not do that? Because the emperor was viewed by the Japanese people as a living god. And gods don't make mistakes. And so there's this whole back and forth. And all of that happened. If you've ever watched the surrender of Japan at the end of World War II, when the men come and get on the boat and go up and sign the paper, the emperor is not in that group. You know why? Because he's deity. You don't make him stoop down and surrender, because he wouldn't do that. Now, what they did eventually get him to do was January the 1st of 1946, he published the Imperial Rescript. He released that. MacArthur released something else. And in that, that was Hirohito, was that his name? Emperor Hirohito. He acknowledged that he was not a god and that emperor worship was not true. He never had to admit that he made a mistake in endorsing the war and any of those things. They didn't make him go that far, but he did acknowledge that emperor worship was, that he was not a living God, and that the concept of emperor worship was false. All right, you have here on the screen the three central aspects of the Shinto faith. The first is affinity with nature and beauty. Again, it goes back to the islands, the Japanese islands being so beautiful. They believe in harmony with the spirits. That's the kami. You want to be in harmony with the way. And then when you get out of harmony, the way to get back in harmony is through purification rituals. And so those can be done at shrines. Typical Shinto shrine has two buildings. You have a front building and you have a back building. Anybody can go into the front building, but on the back building, only local government officials and the priest can go back there. Shinto shrines are torn down and rebuilt every 20 years, regardless of their condition. Anybody have a guess as to why they would do that? A couple of reasons. Yeah, part of it is the climate and wood. They're supposed to be, now most of these are painted, but traditionally Shinto temples are supposed to be like the top left picture, like those boards. They're not to be painted. That's the original belief. And so if you've got wood out there and it's not painted or treated, it's not going to last that long. So that's part of it. The other reason is they're all built a certain way. And they say that if you tear them down and rebuild them every 20 years, then you can pass on to the next generations the way that those are built. It's very, very interesting and very, very fascinating. So, worship at a shrine, when you go into the shrine, the first thing you do is you wash your hands, you bow, you clap your hands to get the attention of the gods, you ring a bell, you bow again, you leave your offering, which can be money, it can be food. You pray, you bow, and leave quietly. That's the approach. Now, you're not required to go to any shrines or temples, except for it is an expectation but not a requirement that every Shinto will once in their lifetime visit the shrine of Iget, which is supposed to be the home of the sun goddess. It's dedicated to her. There are two divisions of Shintoism, sectarian and domestic. And then in the sectarian group, they're divided into 13 groups and then subgroups. It's kind of all over the place. And there are liberals and orthodox and conservative and pure in Shinto as well. And then the second division is really domestic Shinto. Most Japanese people fall into the second division, probably about 80%. What that means is you have some type of altar at home, and you make your prayers and offerings there. So typically that altar is going to have maybe Taoist writings hung on the wall, and you're going to have pictures of ancestors as well. So I think this is my last movie reference. I just realized I'm doing a lot of movies tonight. Karate Kid 2. Anybody remember Karate Kid 2? Mr. Miyagi was a Taoist. No, he was Shinto. I'm getting them confused. He was Shinto because if you remember in Karate Kid 2 when he went back home to Okinawa, is that 2? Okay. There was a temple there, the place that he would also kind of work out at his home there. And there was a picture of an ancestor on the wall and scriptures. And so, and by the way, the place that they had the final fight, that's an ancient Shinto temple. A lot of the scenes that were filmed there were Shinto sites. But most are domestic Shintos and have those things at home. So they do have priests. The priesthood it's typically handed down in the family. It can be male or female. So if the father is a priest and he has daughters, he can pass that along. The priests really are specialists at life-affirming events. So when you have the birth of a baby, or when you're getting married, or when there's a death, you do those sorts of things. Now, I've got a couple of interesting pictures here. What do you think the Shinto priest is doing for the lady in the bottom left picture? Don't overthink it. Huh? She's bought a new car, and that Shinto priest is blessing that car. Now, the picture on the bottom right, you really can't tell. You have to kind of look behind that guy to see that he's in a residential area. So what do you think that Shinto priest is doing for that guy? He bought a house. He's blessing the house. That's the kind of things that they would do. What they do when they bring in the Shinto priest. And they use them for these exercises. Okay? Now, I mentioned earlier that if you get out of flow with the way, purification is very, very important. And so there are lots of ways that you can become unpure. It's interesting that they treat their bodies. There's hardly any Shinto cemeteries anywhere in the world, and that's because they burn the bodies. But if you touch a dead body, you become unclean, and there's a whole list of things that you can do to become unclean. And so there are different things you can do to become pure again, the purification rituals. You can go to the temple, you can make an offering, do this. But the most significant and the highest level of that is standing under a waterfall. And so that's why waterfalls are so important to the Shinto faith and to their idea of becoming pure again with the environment. Also, natural catastrophes make people impure. And so if you think about Japan, bless their hearts, they have a lot of those. They have earthquakes, they have tidal waves, they've had all kinds of things. All of those made people who were impacted by that impure. They had to go to the temples or to waterfalls to become pure again. So this faith still today is mainly in Japan. It has spread to other places of the world. Brazil is one place. Hawaii, there's a large concentration of them in Hawaii as well. And the interesting thing about them is they do not actively seek converts. And so if they don't actively seek converts, their numbers are going down. All right, so how much time have we got? 10 minutes? Okay. So we're going to try to do Scientology in 10 minutes. When I say Scientology, who do you think of? You think of this guy, Tom Cruise, right? Well, Tom Cruise is not the only celebrity that Scientologists go after. They like celebrities because it helps them promote their brand and it helps them to sell material. The Church of Scientology is just people who have gotten very, very smart at the tax laws in America, and they are a publishing company. That is what they do, and that is how they make their money. They say that they are the study of knowledge and wisdom. And that it is a religion in the highest sense of the meaning because it is about how to free and bring truth to all humanity. So the essential tenets of Scientology is that we are immortal spirit beings We'll talk about that. If we don't get to it tonight, we'll talk about it in 2 weeks. And that we are capable of unlimited things if we can just realize that and get to our real self. All right, so if you talk about Scientology, you have to talk about this guy, LRH, L. Ron Hubbard. And Scientology, by the way, they love abbreviations. They've never seen an abbreviation that they don't like. So they call him LRH. It's for L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was born in 1911 in Nebraska. He was actually a science fiction writer during the Depression. He wrote for a penny a word. And it's documented that he told a friend of his, this is for the birds. We're not making any money. He said, if you really want to make money in this country, you know what you ought to do? You ought to start a religion. And that's exactly what he did. He claimed that in 1938, he said he wanted to be famous. And in 1950, he claims that he had that he had a death experience while in a dental chair getting dental work done. He says that he died and that he went to heaven and that God showed him all the secrets of the universe and then allowed him to come back to life and teach that to humanity. So L. Ron Hubbard comes back and he writes his Sentinel work, which is called Dianetics. When I teach classes to my students, I have copies of books and writings from so many faith groups, and I tell my students, if you're at a thrift store, you're at a yard sale, and you can buy a copy of the Quran for $0.25, pick it up because it's good to have that to read, or a copy of this, or Baha'i prayer book, whatever. I always say Dianetics is the only book that you don't waste your money on. Anybody ever tried to read that book? It's a mixture of Buddhism, Hinduism, Gnostic philosophy, and mysticism. And it's not even well written. It's very, very confusing. I've tried to read it. It's very hard to read. It really does not flow, does not make a lot of sense, but Scientologists believe that it's the knowledge that we all need. But from that, he published his book shortly after that, Dianetics, and then he founds the Church of Scientology in 1954. The headquarters is in Washington, D.C. And they say that their main mission is to explain and to help perfect human beings and their behavior. Now, once again, they are a publishing company. That's their primary source of income. And they have figured out that if you declare yourself a church and follow certain rules of the IRS, then you can do all of that and get that income tax exempt. And that's what they've done, and they've done it as well as anybody. Let me see, I'll go ahead. Shortly after the founding of the church, he put the headquarters in Washington, D.C., but he said that the corporate headquarters was on this yacht, which he kept in Florida. And then guess where he would conduct business? He would go out into international waters to conduct business, and that way he was excluded. This is before they got their 501c3 tax-exempt status. They were excluded from any taxes in the U.S. because they weren't doing any business in the U.S. They were in international waters when they were doing business. Now, this began Scientology's fascination with ships and yachts and the Sea Orgs. If anybody's seen Leah Remini talk about growing up in Scientology and she was a Sea Org, well, that was the people who worked on some of their boats. And they still have them today. So he figures all of this out, and today they claim 10 million members, but that number is grossly inflated. It's really believed that there's only about 200 or so thousand worldwide. They're just really, really good at publicity. They're good at marketing. They get celebrities who then become the face of their church and who help them promote this to other people. They will not tolerate criticism. And so if you've seen, and we'll talk in 2 weeks about Leah Remini and the specials and going clear and all of that, all those things that they talk about, they're not being paranoid. That's how the Church of Scientology operates. So we'll stop there and pick up with all of the abbreviations and terms that they use next time. Pray that you have a very Merry Christmas. Pray that you do good in the name of Jesus. Thank you.